a so-called protester or peace activist or all around lovely angel, depending on who you ask, was killed recently in a uh, incident in the West Bank. And of course, the world is now blaming Israel and demanding justice in a very interesting definition of that word. So this woman's name is probably not pronouncing it right. Ashner Ezgi Egi. She's a Turkish American from the state of Washington. She was in the West Bank participating in a so-called protest against the IDF. Now, for people who follow what goes on in the West Bank, it's kind of not been in the news, but this has been going on for many, many years, these so-called protests where Palestinians come up to the fence or to the barrier, wherever it is, different places. It's either a fence or a wall, and basically attack soldiers. Now they throw stones, they try to take down the fence, they do all sorts of engage in all sorts of violent activities. And the IDF unfortunately doesn't always respond, which is why when it does respond, it's seemingly such major news. So there have been calls for an investigation. There have been, demands that Israel change how it operates in the West Bank and so on. Um, but really, the problem is leaving aside the major issues with Israel's policy there, and there are major issues, just not the ones we're being told. The investigation shouldn't be into this woman's death. It should be into her life, and what brought her to the point where she said, "You know what? I'm gonna leave the United States of America." We say this about any random person attending a protest, even in London, in the middle of London, in the center of London, where it means giving up your Saturday to go chant from the river to the sea. And you should know what it is you are standing for and why. So certainly, if you're giving up your life entirely in order to become a human shield for terrorists, then it is your life that is what should be questioned, your life choices, and again, to define somebody like this as a peace activist, as a protester, is a lie. She was a soldier. She was a soldier in the army that is trying to exterminate the Jews, the Palestinian army, whatever faction it is. Again, they all agree on this one point, and she agrees with them in action, if not in words. So, yeah, this we'll talk about a famous incident that happened in the past that's similar to this. And we'll talk about this incident, what should happen, and what will happen, which are polar opposites. Welcome to the Daily Objective. I'm joined by James Valliant. James, your thoughts on this incident?
Well, you point out very accurately the use of the word protest. And that's a really interesting one because the entire Western media is describing this incident as a protest. We in the West are getting used to rights violation, violent activity, and calling it protest. So if, these demonstrators at Columbia University break windows, take over buildings, hold people basically hostage in the basement, don't you know that's a peaceful form of political protest and no one should get prosecuted for it. Well, unfortunately, the same confusion about rights violations, property damage, and in this case, violence, and what making a political statement, that distinction has been lost. And here it's particularly obscene. As you point out, there have been numerous, I mean, far too many even for me to list, count, or adumbrate even adequately, of instances where Palestinians will just, in a group, in a mob, start throwing rocks and bricks at Israeli soldiers, at Israeli officials of any kind. And many times they get injured. And Israel, as you point out, very often will just ignore this. That's not a protest. That's an attack. That's a violent attack on Israeli officials. Now, if you're going to a protest of this kind in the West Bank, and you are part of this quote protest, it is let me put it this way, ladies and gentlemen, it is it is impossible to assume malice on the part of Israel when it does respond, when it does start firing back at people who are engaged in violence that could cause great bodily injury or death to an Israeli soldier. And so this is nothing like a protest. It was in a certain context where everyone knows it's dangerous. Now, as to the particular facts, in this case, there are complaints. People took videos, and there were complaints from people saying, "Hey, no, the violent protest had moved away. She was some yards away when this happened, and so, gosh, her getting shot there must be something wrong here." And of course, came the international outcry. Obviously, and immediately, I mean, their patellar reflex is to assume malice on the part of Israel. On the rare occasions when Israel does do something to push back against these thugs who are not engaged in protest, and is to assume malice. And so, of course, Vice President Harris came out with a giant statement about how things need to change. But Secretary of State Anthony Blinken came out and said Israel has to alter the way they do things. That's the one thing we know. Well, I agree. Israel, the one thing I will take completely out of context, I know, is that Israel has to change the way they do things. First, they have to stop apologizing and giving moral credence to this crap. And second, they have to be more aggressive about putting down these violent assaults on them. And when someone gets shot in this context, I'm not going to assume it wasn't the kind of inevitable accident, even if it was an accident, even if it was. Now, I don't know that. This woman may well have been a valid target for all I know. I'm going to wait for the investigation. But even if it were an accident, accidents of these kinds are going to happen when you're involved in a violent protest in the West Bank against the IDF. And so rather than saying, hey, what is this continuous violence on the part of Palestinians in the West Bank, we're saying, oh no, Israel's got to be more. Now, mind you, Israel's engaged in the most surgical, most delicately, I mean, in the history of warfare, the most careful military operation, way too careful. Because, of course, they have to apologize for any, quote, collateral damage, which is all the fault of the terrorists. All the fault of the terrorists. So, of course, we swallow Hamas numbers whole. If Hamas says more than 40,000 people have been killed so far, we just swallow that. If someone says, well, there could be hundreds of thousands under the rubble, we just swallow that. And we accept it. The first out of the chute, we talked about that hospital, out of the chute, if a hospital gets bombed in Gaza, it's got to be Israel. They intentionally targeted this hospital. They should be intentionally targeting hospitals. They're used as military headquarters and munitions zones. But in any case, we accept whatever Hamas says, hook, line, and sinker. We swallow it whole. The media presents that. Even the U.S. Government sort of assumes that's the atmospherics under this. But anytime something like this happens, it's got to be malice on the part of Israel. Israel's got to have changed the way it does everything. Now, does Hamas get the, hey, you know, you really oughtn't rape and torture people. You really ought not to take civilians hostage. Hamas needs to change the way they do things. Nothing. No, they get rewarded. They get rewarded for offers of more aggressive ceasefires even after they ruthlessly execute 6 of their hostages, as they've recently done. What do? Give them rewards. Well, what did Britain want to do? They wanted to recognize, in the wake of October 7th, they wanted to recognize the Palestinian state. Oh, let's just find what other rewards can we give these monsters? So when Hamas does something terrible, no matter how awful, atrocious, disgusting, violent, well, they need to get rewards. When Israel could be just an accident, we don't know. Nope, they're malicious. We've got to do, Israel's got to change the entire way they do war. Well, no, it is disgusting. It is implicitly anti-Semitic. It's based on the morality of altruism. Israel is not dying enough. They're not sucking it up enough. When the stones and the bricks get being thrown by Palestinians, they've got to just get pegged in the head and get concussions and go to the hospital and die. More Israelis need to sacrifice and die for the cause of protecting Palestinians who want to kill every Jew in the area. they're not altruistic enough. That's the problem, obviously, with Israel. And Hamas, well, that's a totally different thing. They're wild, violent, mystical, collectivist, racist atrocities are not put on a moral scale at all.
Yeah.
That's a natural effusion of uh, anger against the colonialism, don't you know, of Israelis and Americans who have thrown Arabs out of the area.
Yeah, and when when again when judging somebody like this woman, you need to put into context the fact that it is certainly well known to her who she's protecting. She knows what Hamas did, and she chooses to do that, and she chooses to do so in in not just on the streets of London or Seattle or wherever, which is bad enough, but she chooses to do so, head to head with the Israeli military. Thank you, Laura Seto, for the super chat. Laura Seto says, aspiring protesters should study the legal concept of assumption of risk before joining in on these, quote, actions. Yeah. Beyond that, I mean, one of the reasons why they don't assume that there's that much risk there is because Israel's inaction in the face of such again, not protests. I don't even know if to call it riots, but such attacks. Israel's inaction emboldens the enemy. It encourages them to do so. It tells them, look, you can attack soldiers. They can't defend themselves. And then when they do defend themselves, it's some sort of international scandal. So no, the right thing for Israel to do, you said she may have been a legitimate target. She was a legitimate target. Even if just by being a part of that mob, she is a legitimate target. If she herself didn't participate in any violent activity, which I don't know if she did or didn't, then you still chose to be a part of that mob. So yeah, she is responsible for her own death. She got there through her own choices, and she is now meeting her 72 virgins.
What's
Thank you, Bonnie.
astonishing What's
Yeah,
astonishing is that in the face of unknowns, how people make this assumption that she's totally innocent. You just pointed out certain things that make it clear that she is not entirely innocent. Now, but do we address that in the media? Do we ever address that in the commentaries in Britain and the United States? You know, to what extent is she responsible for this herself? That's not even on their radar screen of moral analysis, Razi. She could not. She must be an innocent victim in all of this, don't you know? Obviously, even before we know all the facts.
yeah. Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. I said she's meeting her 72 virgins. Paul asks, do women get the virgins? No, women get their husbands. But if that's right, that's what happens in
Do
Islam.
women even have souls? I'm not quite sure,
I don't
but
know. I heard I haven't studied this deeply, but I heard somewhere that women get their husbands back, which is interesting.
it
Um,
is.
Christian said in the chat, I don't know, I didn't know Israel issued visas to Turkish Americans to support terrorism. Don't come to a country as a tourist with the purpose of creating some havoc. Yeah, I don't know if she entered from Israel or from Jordan, but yes, Israel is too lenient with such people. I mean, it took them well after October 7th to get rid of Al Jazeera temporarily, which is a propaganda channel for the enemy. And I believe BBC is still operating in Israel even after the recent report. So yeah, Israel allows propagandists for the enemy's side and some types of foot soldiers for the enemy's side into its country, which is another sign that Israel doesn't believe it's right and
No.
acts accordingly, unfortunately.
Yeah, they give the moral sanction in just doing that. You know, in the wake of October 7th, in October and November, I remember the story of foreign nationals leaving Gaza, especially, but also the West Bank, in the hundreds. Now, that makes perfect sense to me. After October 7th, you know, and you're anticipating an Israeli attack. Now, an Israeli attack that took way too long to even start happening slowly. I mean, this thing could have been handled much more decisively and aggressively, and much earlier. Nonetheless, hundreds and hundreds of foreign nationals left both Gaza and the West Bank in October and November of last year. This woman decided to head to the West Bank. This woman said, "No, I'm going there." And guess what? I'm going to show up at this violent protest. So, yeah, the context here, let's consider the context here. This woman, had she not wanted to be part of the now, I mean, Israel is surrounded. It's got a multi-front war going on right now. Now, you can, if you're a foreign national in so-called Palestinian controlled territory, you could be among the hundreds who chose to leave, or you could decide, not only am I going to stay, I'm going to go show up at what is probably a violent protest. That is the context here, ladies and gentlemen. Um, I, I'm sure she did not expect or anticipate getting shot that day, or hoped she wouldn't be. But the context here is one where any sensible person would know that they have taken a side, as you say, Razi, and that, yeah, guess what? That's a risk you're taking. Bullets are going to
Taken
fly.
aside and chosen to be a soldier for that side. Yeah, I want to get I want to bring up Rachel Corrie,
Yeah.
somebody who is also had a similar incident 21 years ago. Before that, a few comments in the chat about what women get when they go to Islamic heaven. Um, Somebody says women get piles of dirty laundry. Somebody says she becomes a virgin again and gets passed around to her new husband. Uh, Chuck says, great, so I will have to listen to my wife after I'm dead. No, the women get their husband. The husband, A is non-A in Islamic heaven. So the woman can get the husband without the husband getting the woman. He gets 72 virgins. So if you live a good and live a good Islamic life, die a good Islamic death, you will get that. Of course, you won't, but you will,
Now, there are different views on these things, and if Jewish and Christian sacred texts are awful when it comes to women, uh, just open the Quran and some of those hadiths if you want to get sick about religion-based sexist attitudes. It's really despicable.
And one last comment on this. Teneber says women get one half of 72 different virgins. Yes, because,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, that joke does it. I was wondering if it needs explaining, but it definitely
I'm not
doesn't.
going to comment any further on it.
Okay, so back in 2003, Rachel Corrie, also from Washington State, I don't know what's in the water there, but also came as a 23-year-old girl back in 2003 to Gaza. Israel still had a presence in Gaza. Uh, she came to become a soldier of sorts, and she ended up dying when she also decided to be a voluntary human shield, defending the home of a terrorist that was about to be destroyed from a bulldozer. And it turned out that in that matchup, the bulldozer won. So yeah, she was killed in that incident. That was a scandal at the time. That was an international incident. Israel, of course, didn't stand up for itself in the scandal at the time. And Rachel Corrie has become some sort of a martyr in a sense to the pro-Hamas movement. So in preparation for today, I was watching. I basically looked up on YouTube the woman who just died, and one of the first things that came up was an interview of Rachel Corrie's parents on Democracy Now, which was a very anti-Israel, anti-American channel, and they were talking about how an IDF, if Israel investigates it, it doesn't count. It's a cover-up and the U.S. is helping Israel cover up. So we're going to the ICC or the ICJ or the UN or whoever we know is on the side of Hamas and Hamas supporters on this. Um, so yeah, 21 years on, the lesson hasn't been learned, and because the side that is the actual victim here, the Israeli side, the side that's a victim of Hamas and of Hamas supporters, doesn't stand up for itself, the other side feels emboldened. And Rachel Corrie's parents, look, a 23-year-old woman is responsible for her own decisions. But you can probably trace, in the case of most people at 23, the origins of their ideas. And in the case of Rachel Corrie, if you look at the activities of her parents, now, today, 21 years after their daughter, died fighting for Hamas, you can understand where it came from. Not understand in the sense of accept, understand in the sense of you see that she is her parents' daughter. So yeah, I would love to see parents in such cases take responsibility and say, look, we brought our child up to support terrorists, to support the people who rape and murder and say in the clearest of terms that they want to exterminate the Jews, that they want to finish the job that Hitler started. Uh, we brought them up to do that, and it happens, and then people die, as many of Hitler's soldiers died, as some Palestinians occasionally die, not enough. Sometimes the people who fight for them die as well.
And that's the test of virtue. You see, you're willing to martyr yourself, you're willing to self immolate. Altruism is, of course, a disgustingly perverse approach to morality that actually says you're wonderful when you sacrifice, when you self immolate, when you kill yourself for the cause. And so she's a glorious martyr, don't you know, for the cause of Hamas. And, for psychological, I'm sure, as well as ideological reasons, they must regard their daughter as this heroic martyr for the cause. And isn't that the ideal? Just like Christianity makes martyrdom the ideal. Now, you may not accomplish anything, your martyrdom. It's a good in itself that you were willing to sacrifice. Pick up your own cross like Jesus and sacrifice for others. And this is their model. Their model of life is to suffer and die, is to surrender their life for some cause, as Senator John McCain from my country once said, a cause greater than self. And so you see, these weaker, since the Palestinians are in a militarily weaker position, this girl, even if she puts herself in front of a bulldozer, puts herself. Now, I just want to back up and remind people that I'm not just talking theory when I'm talking altruism. What characterizes so much of Islamic terrorism are things like suicide bombers. Suicide bombers are people perfectly willing to self-immolate because they really do buy this mysticism-based altruism, and it characterizes Islamic terrorism. Now, it may not have characterized that woman's very specific goal at that time. I know I'm going to get killed for the cause, but how else can you understand it except in terms of this kind of radical altruism that says, I will put myself between a bulldozer and the building that's going to come down. Well, yeah, exactly. One human being is going to get smushed by a bulldozer, quite obviously. That is, in effect, a kind of altruistic suicide. But don't kid yourself, people. In reality, altruism, which always has some kind of mystical basis, is about suicide, is about martyrdom. You are, in effect, saying, I am willing to surrender my life, risk my life, take great chances with my life, put myself between a bulldozer and the thing. No, it's a wider form of Islamic suicide, if you will, even if she wasn't Islamic herself. The point is that they're altruists, mystic-based altruists, willing to give and see, their willingness to die, and we're the weaker ones, shows that Israel has to stop because they're the stronger ones. And the analysis stops there. And when Israel Israel has a right to defend itself, says Kamala Harris, but the way they do it is important, she said at the debate. Well, what the hell does that mean? That means they've got to suck it up and die. They've got to altruistically give their life up because they're the stronger ones readily so that they don't kill, quote, innocent Palestinians. This is how the altruist racket works. Who is willing to die more for their cause? Altruism is a death cult, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
And we fought it on both sides.
Thank you, Gail, for the super chat. Davy Boy calls this Bushnellism. Yeah, I don't know if Aaron Bushnell deserves to have an ideology named after him, but in a sense, yeah, that is what it is. I mean, this guy, took the Islamic idea of martyrdom and made it. I don't know. I don't know if he was a religious man. I wasn't really interested in the person himself. I was more interested in how he was made a martyr by secular Western people who support Hamas. But yeah, the same is true here as well. Well, I don't know if the same is going to be true here. It was true with Rachel Corrie. Paul said It's always young women, and then WUB corrects Paul and says, no, it's not, and gives the example of James Henry Miller, who was killed by the Israeli military in Gaza on May 2nd, 2003. Yeah, Rachel Corrie is just a more famous case, but there have been incidents as you would expect. Yeah, if you go to war, we one of the things, and thank you, Jonathan, as well for the super chat. One of the things we hear from the pro-Hamas side is that journalists are dying in Gaza. Now we know it's difficult for journalists to get in, but some so-called journalists already are in Gaza, and we've talked about this. These are journalists who were approved by Hamas, and in some cases were involved in October 7th. Maybe didn't weren't involved in the killing, were just involved in documenting it because Hamas did that as in part as a PR stunt for its own people, knowing how Palestinians would react to the images of sexual assault, of torture, of burning Jews alive, of taking Jews hostage. We know this is something that the Palestinian people want to see, that this fits their culture. So yeah, you keep hearing, the anything that goes under the headline of 40,000 or so many innocent people dying in Gaza. Within that, there's a breakdown, and the breakdown is into different types of bullshit, which involves supposed peace activists who are actually soldiers, volunteer soldiers in Hamas's war, so-called journalists, again, soldiers, so-called humanitarian workers who are there feeding Hamas so that Hamas can keep fighting. When you hear women and children, the idea again that women can't be terrorists is a very Islamic idea, but is not applied by the Islamic side here because they have had women suicide bombers and
Yes.
children as well.
Children
Children,
suicide
anybody.
bombers. They'll strap bombs to children.
Yeah, yeah, there were 14-year-old suicide bombers, but anybody under the age of 18 counts as children. And again, even within that, they lie about what those numbers are. But to suggest that this is not a united culture and society among the Palestinians, a culture united around the cause of exterminating the Jews, is to lie. To say that
A
it's not
lie.
that is to lie about what it actually is. And there's no doubt that the people who go there to defend the Palestinians know who it is they're defending.
In any case, back in the 20th century, when there used to be uh, real wars and then semi-real wars, being a war correspondent was known to be a deadly dangerous job. They were kind of heroes. They were, wow, you're going out there into the war zone, and you might well get killed. In fact, you might get killed by either side. You might just get caught in the crossfire. I've made the point that my uncle was in the Marines during the Korean War, and he was shot by an American, that is to say, by friendly fire. Now, that happens to soldiers. Of course, that's going to happen to journalists. It's going to happen to, bystanders, whatever their context. So, war is like that. Why we don't treat war like that in this context is absolutely beyond me. Yes, when people die, even people that weren't intentionally killed by one of the combatants, that's going to happen. When the bullets start flying, you know, that's why it matters who starts the war. When someone initiates violence against you, they have dictated the only terms by which you can deal with them: violence and response. The user of violence can expect only violence in response. And when the bullets start flying, bullets are going to start flying and people are going to die. So what you do is you either take a side, commit to that side, or you get the hell out of that area. Or you get the hell out of that area. In any other context, we would say in a real war, if a journalist got shot, and it wouldn't matter which side the journalist got shot, we'd say, oh, that's war. We don't say it in this case. Why? Why? No, but you're right. Most of these journalists are, to be in Gaza right now, you got to be Hamas approved. They're working for Al Jazeera, and Al Jazeera has Hamas people on the payroll. I mean, so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about journalists in Gaza, or journalists, many of the journalists in the West Bank. That's what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen. Agents for Hamas who also are on the payroll of something like Al Jazeera. Now, those aren't innocent by any means. Those aren't accidents. But why we don't even have walking into it this approach that, ladies and gentlemen, this is war. War is hell. And no, every death that wasn't anticipated or intentional is a vicious, malicious act on the part of Israel. It's disgusting.
So we are out of time. Let me quickly answer Yotam, who asks, Razi, have you seen Alon Lee Green's reaction to the incident? I haven't. He blocked me on Twitter, so I can't see his reactions and comments on things, but I'm sure it would piss me off. So if you want to send me a screenshot, please do. And
Just to piss
yeah,
you off, because we love you, Roz.
look, the problem when people of the left block me is we have less material for shows.
Ah, yes.
Uh, all right. Thanks everybody for watching. The reality show starts in a couple of minutes. We're going to be talking about, we talked a couple of days ago about the BBC, the report about their bias. We're going to be talking about an interesting way in which a different channel in the UK covered that report, basically justifying the bias. Sorry for the spoiler, but we will be live in a couple of minutes, so join us for that. Thanks, James. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Be safe.